Well, hello and welcome to this special episode of A Photographic Life. This is the first time in all of these years that we've been producing the podcast that I've decided to dedicate one particular episode, a special episode, to one photographer. And that photographer is Martin Parr. Today is Monday, the 8th of December, in the morning. And that's when I'm recording this. Yesterday, on the 7th, on the Sunday, I found out that Martin had died, and that he died on the Saturday, on the 6th. On the Friday, I had written Martin an email, inviting him to come onto this podcast to engage with the new theme that we're launching in the new year. I thought, well, I won't send it on a Friday afternoon. I never send emails on Friday afternoons. I thought I'll send it on Monday morning. That's always a good time. Of course, I can't now send it. Martin was a regular listener to the podcast. He enjoyed it a lot. He subscribed. And whenever I bumped into him, he'd always talk to me about something he thought I'd got right or wrong. But he'd always describe it as being very interesting. At a talk, I think about a year or so ago now, maybe 2 years, I gave on AI at the Royal Photographic Society down in Bristol. He came up to me at the end and he said, "That was interesting, Grant. For once you didn't cause a riot." I took that as a compliment from Martin. But he was always on the periphery of my knowledge, experience of photography as I was working my way through a photographic life. Because of the work he made, because of photo books, because it appeared in exhibitions, I wasn't as aware of it as perhaps I should have been, because I was working in the world of commissioned photography. In 2018, when I came to make the film Do Not Bend, The Photographic Life of Bill Jay, whilst reading about Jay, I heard about a talk that he had given at the Manchester Polytechnic in the early 1970s. If my memory is right, it was 1971. At this talk were Martin Parr, Brian Griffin, and Daniel Meadows, amongst other photographers. Jay introduced Martin to Tony Ray Jones during that talk, and Martin never forgot that. He remained friendly with Bill for many years afterwards. And so when it came to making the film, I knew I needed Martin's contribution. I needed his memories. I also knew that I needed David Hearn's and Brian Griffin's and Daniel Meadows, of course. When I spoke to the others, they all said to me, "Is Martin in it? Has Martin said yes?" The moment I said, "Yeah, he's in it," and in fact, he was one of the very first people we interviewed at his home in Bristol, they sort of relaxed and thought, I think, yeah, it's okay then. We can talk. Not that they needed his say-so, but there was a sort of an unwritten, an unspoken understanding there. When it came to the premiere of the film, Martin very kindly allowed us to premiere it at the Martin Parr Foundation, also in Bristol. At the end of the screening, a packed room full of the literati of, the glitterati, I should say, and perhaps literati of British documentary photography. And so at the end, we all sat around a table, myself, Brian, Daniel, and David Hearn, with a portrait of Bill Jay, which, if a spoiler alert coming up here, if you haven't seen the film, Bill had portraits made of himself from his own ashes, and we had one of those actual pictures on the table with us. Now, as I sit here today, the people sitting at that table, perhaps those who would, perhaps you'd have thought would have lasted the longest, have not. Brian Griffin passed, and now Martin has passed. David Hearn is still with us, and so is Daniel Meadows, I'm pleased to say. But it brings into sharp focus the importance of recording people, lives, discussions, ensuring that photographers are not forgotten. Of course, all of our photographic work remains as evidence of the things that we saw, the places we went, what caught our interest, the people that we met, and perhaps the engagement we had with them, what we were thinking about photography at the time. Those of you in the UK will be well aware of Martin Parr. I think perhaps he's one of the most influential photographers we've ever had in the UK, certainly for a long time. But I'd also argue that he's probably one of the most divisive. A lot of people have a problem with Martin Parr's work. Some don't understand it and think it's just snapshots. Others don't like the colour. They don't like the approach to the working classes. Class was a big thing for Martin. He was very much the observer on the outside, which is strange really if you think about it, because with the Martin Parr Foundation, the days of talks, the evenings of talks, the exhibitions, the events such as Books on Photography, BOP, which he established, which is a fantastic social event as much as anything else. Martin was right there in the centre of everything. He was there to talk to you. You could walk up to him. You could chat with him. He'd ask you how you were, what you were up to. But intrinsically, I don't think he liked the limelight. To me, he was an enigma. I don't feel I really know anything about Martin Parr. I didn't ever really get to the point of talking to him in any way other than factually. I got the impression that he'd worked out quite early how to deal with the negative and positive comments of being the centre of attention by always dealing with it, but wanting to move on to the next thing. A restless soul, if you like. I recently spoke on the podcast about how I'd watched the recent film made about Martin, I Am Martin Parr, and how I felt as if it didn't really get to where it should have got to. I didn't feel as if I knew anything more about him. Maybe that's the key to the observer and not the participant as a photographer. The idea that you're not important, that you don't really need to give anything. But there again, only recently his book, his autobiography came out, which I also spoke about on the podcast, and which I also felt was slightly disappointing. And I think it's okay at this point to be honest about these things. Because after I heard the news of his death, I returned to the book to read it. The book's called Utterly Lazy and Inattentive, Martin Parr in Words and Pictures. And rather than me just going on and on and on, I thought I'd read some of Martin's words. The first page, number 1, with a photograph of him in 1958, aged 5 years of age, begins in this way. It's called Beginnings. Well, I was born on the 23rd of May 1952. I was born in Epsom Hospital in Surrey, England, to Donald Parr, and my mother was called Joyce Doreen Watts. I was brought up in suburbia, initially in Chesington, then in Ashstead, Surrey. And I have a sister, Vivian, who is 7 years younger. My paternal grandfather, George Parr, would have taken this photograph. He took many photos of me. He was an amateur photographer. And it's funny, isn't it, when you start to learn about people, when you start to learn about their lives, how you start to see little connections, which I wish I'd spoken to him about. I don't know as to whether or not he would have responded to me. But he grew up in an area of the edge of Surrey, South London, just where I did. And his family, his paternal family, were from Cheltenham and just outside Cheltenham, which is exactly where I live now. So in a sense, I get a real understanding of that suburban childhood. But again, those words that he chose to start his book with, they don't give us an insight into him, a personal insight. So I decided to turn to the last page of his recent autobiography. 150, like Martin Parr, ? And Martin says this: I've had a wonderful life with photography. I have travelled the world, from visiting amazing North Korea to a vicar's garden party in Somerset, or shooting Mar de la Plata beach in Argentina. What a privilege it has been to see the world and record my response with photography. I had a funny one in Morecambe last summer. I was taking photographs and I had my wheelchair, my rollator with me. This couple came up and said, "Oh, that's a nice camera." They asked, "What are you doing round here?" I replied, "Well, I'm just documenting Morecambe." They said, "You mean like Martin Parr?" I said, "I am Martin Parr." They were rather surprised. I've been taking photos for almost 70 years, and two things have happened in that time. We've witnessed the amazing transformation from analogue film to the digital era. And I've got a lot older. I was taking photographs only last week in Greece, and I photographed something crazy called bouzouki. It was almost unbelievable. It's a tradition of throwing flowers at singers of traditional ballads. I went to a nightclub, and at 2 a.m, a singer came on. As a sign of appreciation, people threw trays of carnations at him. All around the club, young ladies were holding piles of 10 flower-laden trays at a time. These would be replaced as soon as the carnations were thrown, because the best clients are serial throwers. Each tray cost €100, and at the end of each singer's performance, the thrower was given a bill. By the end of the evening, there were so many trays on the ground, it was quite staggering. It is the maddest thing I have witnessed, and it is all thanks to the natural curiosity that being a photographer can bring. We live in a difficult but inspiring world, and there is so much out there I want to photograph. Okay, next photo. Which one? Take care.